Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about the Maison Margiela Replica line of fragrances. And really I would say that this fragrance line was one of the first designer fragrance lines that I ever really tried and ever got to know in department stores. And I really got very interested in the idea behind this brand, and I just thought it would be interesting for me to try all of their fragrances and to talk about them all in one video and to rank them at the end of the video as well. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology even, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews as well. But if you haven't seen me before and you are interested, then please do consider subscribing, and also please like this video if you do end up liking this content. So Replica started back in 2012, but really they're better known as a brand that makes clothing. They started their clothing brand back in 1988. And since they've started their Replica line of fragrances, they have released a total of 23 fragrances. Of those, 7 of those fragrances are currently discontinued. So I've managed to actually sample 16 of their fragrances, which I'm going to discuss in this video. So Maison Margiela have a very distinctive mission statement with their fragrances. They say that their Replica line is reproduction of familiar scents and moments of varying locations through fragrance. So basically they're trying to capture a certain situation or a certain memory in one of their fragrances, and hopefully to try and trigger a similar memory in you when you smell that fragrance. I'm going to do this in chronological order of release. So I'm going to start with the oldest fragrances in the Replica collection. And back in 2012, Replica released a set of 3 fragrances, one of which is now discontinued, and that was Funfair Evening, but the other 2 are still going strong. So the first one of those is Flower Market. And I always remember when I used to go and try Replica fragrances when they first sort of came out, I would always gravitate towards Flower Market. It was always my favourite, and I don't like it anywhere near as much as I used to, but I still do think it's a very good fragrance at evoking that feel of a flower market. So for me, this is very much a white floral fragrance. It's very strongly freesia based fragrance. It's quite soapy because of the freesia. And there's also some jasmine, there's a bit of tuberose, but really it's mainly the freesia. As this dries down, you start to get some of the oak moss, but I think the oak moss is really lost in the full dry down. The oak moss also contributes to a little bit of the soapiness. Really, as this dries down further, you still do keep the white florals, but it also becomes slightly fuzzy. It's got that kind of musky fuzziness that peach can sometimes give fragrances. And I think that's really the part of the fragrance that I'm less keen on. Initially, this has a dewy green feel. Even though it is quite dewy and green to begin with, it is quite a warm fragrance overall, which kind of surprises me with how you would think of a flower market. You always think of a flower market somewhere that's a little bit cooler, don't you? Because the flowers wouldn't survive very long in warm weather. It's something that's just pretty. You just smell pretty when you're wearing this one. I think I did consider buying this one at points in my life, but I think the short longevity of this fragrance really put me off buying it. And it's something that's quite close to skin after not very long for me. So this one didn't feel like great value for money, but I do think it's pretty. So that's Flower Market. The other fragrance from the range released in 2012 was Beach Walk. So Beach Walk starts off quite bright and sunshiny feeling. It opens with bergamot. It's very refreshing to begin with, but that's quickly followed by some yellowy, sunshiny florals. And really it's a very floral fragrance overall. Something called Beach Walk I wouldn't really think of as a floral fragrance. So I really thought there was tiare in this, but there's nothing listed that says tiare. But to me, the yellow sunshiny florals sort of transform from something that smells more like tiare in the opening into something that's more ylang-ylangy, something that's more yellow and waxy by the dry down. I also think this fragrance has an opening that has a slightly fresh, salty feel, which I guess is maybe the idea of the beach walk. The beach walk for me is much more of a tropical beach, or, you know, like a warmer beach. It's not really a North Atlantic coast kind of beach for me, this beach walk. If I didn't know better, I might think this fragrance had some white florals in here as well. Something smooth and petally, something more like magnolia or perhaps even a gardenia in this fragrance. It is a very overly floral fragrance. This fragrance also has a slightly shampooey coconut feel in the mid, which then dries down further into something that really resembles the old style coconut soaps that you used to get from the Body Shop, sort of a little bit of a drier coconut feel. I actually really like this fragrance, but I do just generally like yellow sunshiny floral fragrances overall. I have a lot of sunshiny floral fragrances in my collection. And I think this one is interesting to me because of the coconut, but also because of the citrus at the beginning of the fragrance. And I think that, is this fragrance terribly interesting? Is this terribly innovative? No, it isn't. Is it well done? Yes, I think it is well done. And I also think that if you're just looking for those kinds of notes, this is a good example of that. And I just think it's really sunshiny, uplifting, and it's just a fragrance that is going to make you smile. It had decent longevity and it was much stronger than Flower Market as well. So that's Beach Walk. So on to 2013 now, and there were 2 more fragrances released as part of the Replica line, and one of them was called Promenade in the Gardens, and that's sadly discontinued now, and that was described as an earthy rose garden kind of fragrance. The other one released that year is called Jazz Club, and that's really been one of the most popular fragrances in the Replica line. So Jazz Club is a bit of a controversial one for me because there are aspects of it that I really enjoy and there are aspects of it that I'm not so keen on. But I think Jazz Club might have been reformulated over the years because I've got 2 different samples from 2 different sources and probably dating from different times, and they smell quite different to me. So I'm just going to talk you through both of them and then you can make your own mind up about it. So Jazz Club starts off with a really boozy sweetness to me, but that's quickly sort of overtaken by something else. And in one of my vials, that is clary sage. So it turns into something that's kind of like a blue shower gel, a men's shower gel kind of fragrance. But there's also something in that particular sample vial that really makes me think of like tinned vegetables, tinned sweet corn, tinned peppers, tinned red peppers in with sweet corn. You sometimes get the pepper bits chopped up with the sweet corn. That's what that makes me think of. It's very vegetal. And that really sticks around until the dry down. In another sample vial I don't get any of that. I get a little bit of the vegetal feel, but none of the clary sage in the fragrance whatsoever. There isn't that sort of shower fresh feel to it. So I'm not sure which one is of which age. So I think Jazz Club overall in the dry down is more about a dry, unsweetened tobacco. But I would say the tobacco is relatively light. I think if you're looking for a heavy tobacco fragrance, you're not going to find it in Jazz Club. There's also a slight leatheriness to Jazz Club too, and there's also some ambroxan, and the ambroxan for me is quite off-putting. I think there may also be some isoe super here too. So I haven't been to this Jazz Club and I'm not sure that I would stick around if I did get to go really. I think this one is just a bit light feeling for me, and if I think about things that I would associate with a Jazz Club, it ticks all those boxes, but there's just not enough of them. I would expect something really boozy, something really leathery, something really tobacco-y, and I just don't get it in this fragrance. And I also find the ambroxan and the isoe super just a little bit much as well for me. So this one isn't for me, but I know this one's popular, and I know that it's loved, so it could be for you. So I would recommend going to try this one if this is something you think might interest you. So that's Jazz Club. So also released in 2013 is one I forgot about earlier, and that's Lazy Sunday Morning. So Lazy Sunday Morning is really exactly what you would expect from a fragrance called that. It's a warm, musky, clean, almost detergent, soapy kind of fragrance. Really evokes those feelings of clean sheets really on a bed. And yeah, just sort of something comforting really. It really makes me think of a really bright room with sunshine streaming through it. I think that's really the feeling that those aldehydes give this fragrance. So this has aldehydes, but not in like a Chanel No. 5 kind of aldehyde feeling kind of fragrance. It's very light and bright, and something where the aldehydes have been used with a very light touch, or perhaps they've used different types of aldehydes to something like Chanel No. 5. So this fragrance does have that soapy detergent feel, and I guess that's the lily of the valley in this fragrance, but also it has this just light feeling pink rose. It's very uplifting, very fresh and very clean feeling. But in the dry down, the aldehydes calm down, it becomes a little bit more powdery, it becomes more musky, and it just becomes a little bit less interesting to me than it was in the opening. I think really this fragrance in the dry down really makes me think of fragrances like Lovely, like Narciso Rodriguez EDP. It's kind of a hybrid between the two really. Again, much like Lovely does for me, it makes me think of clean hotel duvets, white hotel duvets, really plush and plump duvets. I really think this is an interesting fragrance. I think it's a nice fragrance, especially if you love soapy fragrances, you'll probably like this one. I really like the use of aldehydes in this fragrance, but I think for me, for this price point, I'd expect something more than the dry down of Lovely. So that this one's not for me, but I do see the love for this one. I think it's a pretty fragrance. That's Lazy Sunday Morning. So next we're up to 2014, and Maison Margiela actually released 2 more fragrances in the Replica line, one of which is discontinued. So that one was Tea Escape, which actually sounds a lot like Matcha Meditation, but perhaps with a slightly more gourmand kind of feel to it because of the rice note in that fragrance. But the one that's still on the market is called At the Barber's. So At the Barber's, as you might expect, is something that really evokes the feeling of shaving soap in the opening. It's something that I was absolutely struck by how much it made me think of shaving soap. It's warm and it's fresh and it's clean. This fragrance to me is very much like a man out of a herbal bath. It really takes me on a scent memory back to childhood. My dad had a wool dressing gown that he'd had for years and years and years. And when I was little, I was allowed to wear this dressing gown after I'd had a bath on a Sunday night and watch TV for an hour before I had to go to bed. And this fragrance makes me think of that dry dressing gown. It just had his smell on it, this dressing gown, his out of the bath kind of smell. And clearly this fragrance takes me to that memory, which I think is really lovely for me. But perhaps, other people won't have that scent memory and that association. So I have to look at this objectively, don't I? So the opening is all about that shaving soap, but as this dries down, it loses some of that freshness. It becomes quite musky. And the rosemary and the lavender in the dry down really mix for me. I can't really discern between the two of them. And it's something that's very much in the middle of those two smells for me. It's neither one nor the other. There's also something slightly sharp in the background, but it's nothing too much. I really don't have much to say about this fragrance. I think because of that strong scent memory for me, it's so distinctive, but I just can't really describe it. It's definitely something that does make me think of my dad's dressing gown. It smells like a man getting out of a herbal bath, basically. I've not really smelt many fougere fragrances, but I do quite like this one. I don't think this fragrance is something that I would like to smell on me. I think I would enjoy smelling it on someone else, but I also think that I don't think I'd be excited by smelling it on someone else. I think it would just make me think that they were fresh and clean. So that one's At the Barber's. That it was incredibly strong and it lasted for ages on me, so there are no problems there. So 2015 was a big year for Maison Margiela because they released 2 fragrances and they were both big loves, I think, for most people. So the first one is Lipstick On, which is sadly discontinued. That was a sweet, waxy iris fragrance, very reminiscent of lipsticks from the name. And I think a lot of people missed that one now that's discontinued. The second one is actually one of their biggest hits. I think it might actually be their biggest selling fragrance. So their biggest selling fragrance is By the Fireplace. So By the Fireplace is a fragrance that I remember trying years and years ago, maybe about 2020 when I first started doing fragrance YouTube. It really struck me as something very smoky and I really struggled with it. And I don't know whether my taste has changed or it's been reformulated, but to me this doesn't smell half as smoky as it used to. So has this been dulled down? Has it been changed to make it slightly more friendly? I don't know. Or has my taste changed? So this one opens very interestingly for me with something like a burnt sugar, a brown sugar kind of note. It smells like, like the Baccarat Rouge kind of burnt sugar. It's that ethyl maltol super sweetness, the candy floss kind of sweetness that you get in certain fragrances. And I guess that was just quite on trend at the time, wasn't it? It's smoked but sweet. It's kind of like a corked sugar, really. I guess the things that really make this difficult for some people are the things that give it a slight smokiness and a slight tarry feel almost. And that's really, I think, the Gaiac wood and the Peru balsam. So I think those two things give it a deep, lightly bitter, slightly tarry-like vanilla feel to the fragrance that can just be a little bit of a struggle for some people because of that bitter feeling, because of that tarry feeling, because of that sort of slight smokiness. In the background for me, there's sort of something almost medicinal here. It smells like, those treated bandages that you got years and years ago. I don't know what they used to treat bandages with, but there's kind of that smell in the background of the fragrance. So you have sort of smoky, tarry, bandagey kind of smells in this fragrance, which makes it not entirely friendly, but very distinctive in a way. As this dries down, it just becomes a lot easier and friendlier. That sort of medicated feel almost disappears and it becomes less tarry, less bitter, it becomes sweeter, easier. It just has this sort of lovely, almost creamy feeling chestnut vanilla to the fragrance in the dry down, and it's almost sort of sugary as well. I can see why people really like this in the dry down, but there's also that sort of slightly smoky, woody bitterness still in the background of the fragrance, just hanging on. So my main problem with this fragrance is that I have another fragrance that really is very close to this fragrance, and that one is Ameer Al Oud Intense Oud by Lattafa, and clearly this fragrance was inspired by the Replica fragrance, but the price point difference is stark between these two. So this one retails for what, £12, £10? Replica fragrances retail for £55 for 30ml, or £115 for 100ml, I think the price is now. It might even be more than that. So I'm never going to buy by the Fireplace. And I actually think that Lattafa fragrance is more wearable because it doesn't have that bitterness, that tarriness that the Replica fragrance has. It's an easier fragrance for me to like. So yeah, I see why this one was a winner. I see why it's popular. I see why the Replica fragrance is perhaps more complex than the Lattafa, but I just think in general the Lattafa is probably easier for most people to wear. So that's by the Fireplace. So in 2017, Maison Margiela released another 2 Replica fragrances in the line. And the first one was Music Festival, which is sadly discontinued. So that was quite a hippie patchouli based fragrance, but with a fruity tobacco and some greener notes as well. But the other one released in 2017 was called Sailing Day. So Sailing Day initially gives the impression of a really blue, really warm sort of tropical ocean that's quite choppy. It's quite fresh feeling, it's clean, it's an ozonic feeling, and then as it dries down, it sort of becomes a little bit vegetal, a little bit green, even a little bit spicy even. So it sort of evokes that feeling of the seaweed, of smelling seaweed close up. You get kind of unpleasant fragrances from that, sort of like sulfurous compounds and things like that as the seaweed is rotting almost. And that's really the feeling I get from this fragrance really in the dry down. But I think I really struggle with this one because it makes me feel a bit sick. And I think that's probably the cologne in this fragrance. I'm just not very good with cologne. I think really the things I struggle with about this one are, one, the cologne, but also in the dry down, there's a very latex feeling coriander note in this fragrance that really does turn my stomach along with that cologne. And I think that really means that this fragrance is just a complete no for me. And I'm really surprised that this is the number 7 bestseller for the Replica line of fragrances. So that's Sailing Day. So in 2018, Maison Margiela released Under the Lemon Tree. And Under the Lemon Tree has really been one of their sleeper hits. It's one that not many people really talk about, but it's actually their 6th bestseller. And I guess that's because it's quite easygoing, I guess, this fragrance. I actually really love the opening. The opening to me is lemon verbena. It's a really uplifting, sunshiny, zingy, slightly citrusy kind of opening. And it's that kind of citrus that isn't super sharp. It's quite gentle and I quite like that. I think as this dries down though, it becomes less interesting for me and it becomes sort of a more of a bitter orange. It goes kind of woody and it goes incredibly musky. It has that kind of grainy musk that I really don't love in fragrances. And that kind of puts me off this one. But I can see why people would love the opening for sure. It's really pleasant, the opening. I love that kind of lemon verbena feel. I don't love the dry down of this one, but I think if you like citrus musks, this is probably one for you to check out. I think this really did do a really good job of eliciting that feeling of being in a lemon grove. It just made me think of my Mediterranean holidays. It just has that sort of slightly dry feeling citrus in there that really does make you think of hot climates and being somewhere cool under trees. I think it does a good job, but it's just not for me because of the dry down. It's got that really bright sunshiny feel to it as well, so that's Under the Lemon Trees. So in 2019, Maison Margiela released 3 fragrances, 2 of which are now sadly discontinued, but I'm going to talk about them because I think they're a lot of people's favourites and I have managed to sample them. So the first one is Whispers in the Library, and this one goes for hundreds of pounds now secondhand, and I see why it's loved because it's very wearable and it's something that's very mass appealing. I can see this as somebody's signature scent and them really, really missing it. So this is just a warm, woody vanilla, and there are a lot of warm, woody vanillas out there, but I think this was a good one. So this opens with a peppery, sort of cedary kind of feel to it. It's very woody. And then it goes more from a woodiness into something that sort of slightly turns more papery almost. It smells almost like a mixture between dampness and dustiness. It really does evoke that books in a library kind of feel. In the dry down, it becomes very much more a vanilla fragrance than anything else. And the vanilla is almost boozy, actually. There are aspects to this that really makes me think of actual sort of drinks, you know. It makes me think of casks. I guess the woodiness is making me think of the casks. But along with the vanilla, it just makes it sort of into a gourmand leaning kind of vanilla fragrance without it being too gourmand. It's just very wearable, and I can see why it's likeable and why people would really miss this one. I think this one's really nice, and I think Maison Margiela are absolutely mad to discontinue this one. I don't think I'd need it because I do have other woody vanillas in my collection. It's discontinued anyway, but I do think it's a nice fragrance. So that's Whispers in the Library. So the other fragrance that they've recently discontinued is Coffee Break, and this one is a fragrance that really shocked me because I thought it was going to be mainly coffee when I first tried it, and it really wasn't. So this is a milky, almost kind of sweet lavender fragrance, really. And really the coffee is quite background. I actually spoke to one of the shop assistants when I was trying to find a sample of this one. And she said to me that she thinks that people, when they're wearing this, smell like a latte or more like a mocha, I think she said. And I kind of get that. It does have that kind of gourmand feel to it. But I think this one really makes me think of like wearing a cashmere jumper next to a fire in the winter whilst drinking a milky coffee drink. More of a milky drink than a coffee drink, really. I think it's just very hygge in a way. It's very sort of comforting and, cosy, I think. I really like this fragrance, and I'm sad they've discontinued it. So that's Coffee Break. So the only one from 2019 that isn't discontinued is called Springtime in the Park, and this one opens with a powdery, chalky, sweets kind of feel. It makes me think of those push-up lollipops that you'd get that are in the shape of a lipstick. It really smells like those used to, and it has that kind of same texture that those have. In fact, it really makes me think of all Swizzle Matlow's kind of hard candy, pastel-coloured sweets. Really, overall, this is quite a soapy fragrance as this starts to dry down. You get some Lily of the Valley, but it also has a soft pink rose there. And it's got a background fruitiness to it that's kind of a little bit indistinct. I'm not quite sure exactly what that is. I think really in the dry down of this fragrance, it's less musky than at the beginning. And really that means that it loses its longevity and it loses its power very, very quickly, this fragrance. I wouldn't ever buy this because of just how light it is and how it just doesn't really last. But I do think it's really, really pretty. So that's Springtime in the Park. So next in 2020, Maison Margiela released Bubble Bath. And I think Bubble Bath is one of my favourites from this entire line. And I think the reason I really like Bubble Bath is because it makes me think of matey bubble baths that I had when I was little. And I remember having a colour change bubble bath I absolutely couldn't get enough of. And it makes me think of the smell of that bubble bath. So this one is very much a liquid soap rather than a solid soap, or something that's more akin to a soap crystal than a solid soap. But it also has this lovely kind of coconut feel to it as well. And the coconut really makes me think of a soap I had in the shape of a polar bear from the Body Shop when I was little as well. And that coconut feeling is the same that I get from the other fragrance that I mentioned previously, the Beach Walk fragrance. It's the same kind of coconut in these two fragrances. Really, this fragrance also has a nice soft lavender. It has a little bit of a jasmine and also a really clean musk feel to it as well. I just think this one is just so reminiscent of being in a bath, and it really brings back a childhood memory for me. And I think that's why I like this one so much. It has really good longevity and it's really fresh and clean for the summer as well. I can actually see myself buying a little decant of this one. I really like this fragrance. That's Bubble Bath. So 2021 was a little bit more productive for Maison Margiela. They produced 3 fragrances in 2021, and the first one was Matcha Meditation. So Matcha Meditation is a controversial fragrance because I think Matcha Meditation is one that doesn't really fit with the rest of the brand. It's something that's really quite different. And I guess they were trying to reimagine Tea Escape in a way and feed into that sort of matcha trend that was around at the time. And never really sure whether I like it or not. There's sort of aspects to this that I find really interesting, really love. And then there are aspects to this that I find quite off-putting. So the thing that I find quite off-putting is that when I first spray it, it can sometimes make me think of nori, you know, the seaweed stuff that you wrap around sushi. It makes me think of that. And I find that quite off-putting, but that seems to go quite quickly, at least on me. I'm not quite sure whether it goes quite quickly on other people, or even whether other people smell that, but I definitely smell that. So overall, this is a clean, woody, almost nutty feeling jasmine fragrance. It's sweet yet savoury and floral, and it's just such a striking mix. To begin with, it makes me think of unsweetened popcorn or nutty brown rice almost. But it has that clean, slightly green feeling jasmine that really grows and starts to dominate the fragrance as it dries down. It's also a bit powdery and very slightly sweet. It's very interesting kind of gourmand in a very non-gourmand, non-obvious kind of way. As this dries down, the jasmine dies back a bit and it goes more into like a creamy, chestnutty feeling fragrance. Still very savoury. It doesn't really smell similar to it, but it really makes me think of Theo Cabanel's Je ne sais quoi in the way that it's a savoury gourmand fragrance. And I think they're quite unusual and I quite enjoy them in a weird kind of way, but I think I'd always choose Je ne sais quoi over this one. I think this fragrance is really unusual and it's worth sniffing, but I think this is going to cause a massive split. I think there are going to be a few people that will absolutely love this, and then quite a lot of people who will probably really hate this, and then a small minority that are going to be like indifferent to it or just like it. I think I'm probably in that small minority of just like it. I do think it's really interesting though, and I do think it's worth sniffing. So that's Matcha Meditation. So the other fragrance released in 2021 was Autumn Vibes. And I remember this one being released and it just got virtually no love. And I think people were comparing it to other fragrances, and that might have been why it didn't get as much love as it perhaps should have done. I actually think this is a really nice fragrance. So this is a sort of slightly spiced woody fragrance. It's quite cedary, it's got some pepper, it's got cardamom, it's got a warmth to it, it's got a sweetness to it, and also really interestingly, as this dries down, it becomes a little bit powdery because there's carrot seed, and I really like carrot seed in fragrances. It can give it a really interesting feel and it gives it a nice texture as well. I think this one is underrated and I would urge you to go try it. So I've seen Autumn Vibes compared with Après and also with Stash by SJP. I don't think it's that similar to Après. I think they're just both cedary fragrances. I think that's where the similarity ends. When I think about Stash, I think of Stash as something that's slightly more peppery. It's also got that very definite grapefruit opening. It's got sage. It's just very different. It's sort of slightly more polished wood in its feel, and it has that kind of slightly milky feel as well, that kind of coconut feel in the dry down, that sort of burnished coconut feel that makes it slightly different to Autumn Vibes. Autumn Vibes is more gentle, it's more innocent, it's just a little bit sweeter, it's a little bit more easier going than Stash is. I do think it's just a really nice fragrance, and I do think it stands out on its own. It doesn't need to be exactly the same Stash. It's not a dupe at all. I just think it's quite intimate and cosy, and I think it's worth going to try. So that's Autumn Vibes. So the next one from 2021 is called When the Rain Stops, and I remember being so excited to go and try this one back in 2021 that I actually made an entire video about petrichor as a result of trying that fragrance. And I don't think When the Rain Stops is really a great example of petrichor. I mean, go watch that video if you do want to learn more about petrichor, because it's very detailed. But really for me, petrichor is mostly about the smell of geosmin, which is more about the smell of beetroot, that kind of earthy smell. I'm not entirely sure I want to smell of petrichor, so I think it's probably quite good that When the Rain Stops is not necessarily the best petrichor fragrance out there. To me, When the Rain Stops is more about the dewy, wet feel of a garden. This fragrance is green throughout as well, and it's something that has a sort of a light piney feel and then a more of a mossy feel in the dry down. But really the dry down does stay quite wet and quite true to that sort of dewy garden feel. It still is quite watery and ozonic really, even in the dry down. I think the more recent times I've tried this, I've really noticed the fresh pink rose that's in the dry down. And that's really dominated the fragrance for me and made me think differently about this fragrance. I think this fragrance is more floral than I first thought, and definitely less green than I first thought. But I think that probably makes it slightly more wearable for most people. But I think this one just overall just doesn't get me excited to want to wear this one. And I don't think I'd choose it. But I do think it's an interesting fragrance. I think it's an interesting idea behind the fragrance. That's When the Rain Stops. So in 2022 we got On a Date, and I remember looking at the scent profile of this one and thinking, oh, that looks a bit boring, I've seen that before. And then I tried it and I was really surprised and shocked that I loved it so much. I think the thing I love about this one is it is so natural, and the blackcurrant is really sparkly and it's really green and tart, which is what I really love with blackcurrant. So this one has rose as well, and the rose as it dries becomes darker, but it's still quite a rich rose even from the off, really. I think this fragrance is meant to make you think of red wine. I don't really get that from this one, but I do just think it's very rich overall. So this has pink pepper and it also has oak moss, and I think that's what gives this fragrance that sort of sparkly feel and also that green tartness that you get from the blackcurrant. This in the dry down still continues that sparkly feel with the musk, but really the musk also has a slight soapiness to it. And actually there's still some woody patchouli. So it's almost like being actually next to a blackcurrant bush. You get the smell of the leaves, you get the smell of the fruit, and you get the smell of the woodiness of the actual bush itself. I just think this one's a very striking fragrance. It's quite a quiet one. It's quite a skin scent for most of its life, but it's got very good longevity and I really like this one. So that's On a Date. So in 2023 we got two other fragrances that I've sadly not managed to smell. So the first one was Under the Stars, which is supposed to be a leathery, oudhy fragrance that hasn't really had a very good review actually from anybody I've seen. Most people tend to sort of think this one's quite boring. I haven't tried it, I can't judge. The other one that was released in 2023 is sort of a kitchen garden fragrance. It's called In the Garden. And that one's supposed to smell like tomato leaves and various other kind of herbal smells. And that one also didn't get a great reaction. I guess, maybe that's just not a very friendly kind of note profile for most people to be absolutely in love with. So I kind of understand that. So I think really overall, three things about replica fragrances that I've learnt from testing them is that the lighter fragrances often have soapy notes. Another thing is that they are not afraid to use aroma chemicals and they use them quite well and appropriately. They're not generally too much for me. And also I think in general, they're very good at actually replicating the situations that they call their fragrances. And I think some of these fragrances do stand out as something quite different. So now I'm going to rank the fragrances in my order of preference. So starting from the bottom, I think the one that I really disliked was Sailing Day. It just made me feel a bit sick. That kind of fragrance profile is just not for me, but it doesn't mean that it's not necessarily for someone else. It's just I can't tolerate cologne. Number 15 is going to be At the Barber's. As much as I got a scent memory from that of my dad's dressing gown, I don't think I'd ever want to smell like that. So I think that one's out for me. But I do think that it's a really nice, clean feeling fragrance. It just doesn't really excite me. Number 14 surprised me because I've put Flower Market there, and that's just because I don't necessarily like it as much as I used to. I think the freesia is just too much for me. It's quite soapy and I don't like the peachy muskiness in the dry down. So that's why that one's gone in at number 14. But I do like the jasmine and tuberose in that fragrance. Number 13, I'm choosing When the Rain Stops. It's fine. It's just a dewy, fresh garden. Doesn't make me excited to wear that one. Number 12, I'm choosing Under the Lemon Trees. I absolutely love the lemon verbena opening, but the muskiness in the dry down just puts me straight off that fragrance, unfortunately. Number 11 is their number 2 bestseller, Jazz Club, and there's something about this that I'm just not sure about, and I guess having two samples, one with that weird tin vegetable vibe, has just put me off a little bit. But I do see that there are interesting elements to this, and I think if it was just a bit richer, I might like it a bit more. Number 10 is Springtime in the Park. I really like that sort of sweets opening that it's got, but I think if I want a floral fruity musk, there are better lasting and potentially also better fragrances out there for me to choose from. Number 9 is Lazy Sunday Morning. I really do love this fragrance and I really like the opening of it. I love the aldehydes. But I think as this dries down, it becomes less interesting. And the fact that it really reminds me of Lovely by SJP just makes me less interested in it. Number 8, I'm going with a number 1 bestseller by the Fireplace. It may have been groundbreaking at the time. I do think it's interesting, and I really do think that it has a lot of elements to it and a lot of layers. But I really feel like Ameer Al Oud Intense Oud has pretty much covered it, and I can't see that I would ever spend the money on that fragrance if I could buy one that was pretty similar for about £10 or £12. Number 7 is Autumn Vibes. I think this one's underrated and I think it's a nice fragrance. And I just think it's got some things about it that make it softer, more intimate and just cozy. It's just a nice autumnal fragrance. Number 6 is one of their oldest fragrances and it's Beach Walk. I was not expecting to like this one quite as much as I did. But I love the coconut, I love the sunshiny florals and I love the citrus opening. It's a winner, it's long lasting. Definitely one that I would want to check out further. Number 5 is Coffee Break. It's just so hugger. It's just so comforting and cozy. It's just such a shame it's been discontinued, and it was a really interesting fragrance that really surprised me that it wasn't more about coffee. Number 4 is going to be Matcha Meditation, which I think is a fragrance that doesn't fit with the rest of the Replica line and is going to be very much a love or hate kind of fragrance for most people. I think there's a weird seaweed feel at the beginning that could put a lot of people off, but I really love that savoury gourmand feeling and I love that jasmine in the fragrance. But I'm not sure how much I would wear it. Number 3 is Whispers in the Library. I just find it very easy to wear. It definitely evokes what it's trying to evoke. And I love the very comforting vanilla in the dry down. Number 2 is On a Date. That's controversial. I know a lot of people don't like the blackcurrant, but I really love the blackcurrant in this fragrance. I really love just how natural it is, and I love the rose too. And finally, my number 1 is Bubble Bath. It just evokes a really strong scent memory for me. It takes me straight back to childhood, and I just really love that about it. And I just think it's a very striking fragrance and a very interesting fragrance too. And I love that it's something that's so wearable whilst also being very unusual. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know how you would rate some of these fragrances, and also if you haven't already done so and you did enjoy the video, then please press the like button, and also please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.